So I love doing these curious about coaching sessions, is what I call them, a couple times a year because they're fun. And because generally people in healthcare are skeptical, we're trained to be skeptical. And so I love just sharing what coaching is and how it can work, and a little bit about the way that I do it, which I think is a little bit different than sort of standard generic coaching, and a little bit about me. And then I always pick a topic to share. And so tonight I'm going to talk about change, and why for many people who struggle to change, why the change doesn't work. And then when you do it, why it doesn't stick. And so hopefully you will all leave with a few pearls as to how to help change stick this time. So for those of you who don't know me, I do coaching now full-time, and I call what I do mindful coaching because it's a blend of mindfulness and traditional coaching, and a blend of much of the wellness work that I did before I became a coach. And I have been running Pause and Presence now, which is what I call what I do, for 4 years. So that's kind of fun. 4 years this month. And I do a lot of one-on-one coaching, small groups, retreats. I coach fellows. I coach in teams. I coach in institutions, and I do a lot of speaking. And it's fun. And I like to mix it up because I think we learn from all the different places that you can use this work, and people in different places can come to this work. If you talk at a grand rounds, it's very different than someone who comes to a session like this. And so I feel like you can reach people in different spaces and different energies. And that brings a lot of value to people, again, who are skeptical. One of the things that I know from having worked in physician wellness for 17 years is that many people in medicine are even skeptical of wellness itself and what that means. And many people don't even know what it means, but they wouldn't come to a wellness thing, but they might come to something else. And so I think they might go to a retreat because that feels good. And so I think you can meet people where they are. And that is one of the things that I love to do in coaching. So I am a pediatrician by training, and I practiced pediatrics for about 22 years until maybe 4 years ago. And I led wellness at TPMG for many, many, many years. I also am a wife. I've been married for 30 years to my neurodiverse husband, who actually now works with me. So that informs a lot of my coaching on relationships, which I do a lot of. And I'm a mom of 3 young adult sons. My youngest is 18, and he's just turned in his last college application today. So I'm feeling very free. It doesn't matter to me how it turns out. Our job is done. And so I will be an empty nester shortly. And I am a grandma of a 7-8-month-old now, which is also my newest hat. And I'm learning a lot from that. And then the last thing that I am is a yoga teacher. And that is where my mindfulness training comes from. And I bring a lot of yogic philosophy into what I do as a coach. So I always like to be very transparent about that. And I also like to encourage all of you to join me for yoga. And I know that many of you here do, but it is one of the things that actually makes the coaching work better. And I will talk about, and the change and the transformation work better when you tap into mindfulness and you tap into your parasympathetic nervous system. So while I offer it as just yoga, it is also very intentional to send subliminal messages about change and willingness to change while you're all relaxed. And so I would love it if you join me, and it's free. It's most Saturdays. It's actually not this Saturday because I'm going tomorrow to visit my best oldest friend. But it's otherwise most Saturdays. And then the sessions get recorded, so you can find them on YouTube and practice when I'm away. So tonight I'm going to share with you this change topic, and then I will answer questions just about what I shared, and any questions about any of group coaching. I have a bunch of group coaching that starts at the beginning of the year. So if people have questions about that or retreats, I've been getting a ton of emails. So maybe some of you are showing up to ask your questions. That would be fun. But you can also send me emails with questions. And then I'm going to offer a chance for people to get some live coaching. So if anybody knows that they want to do that, you can put a message in the chat box if you want. And if at any point you decide, once you get more comfortable, for those of you who are new, you might decide you want to get coached. And I'm happy to sort of coach on anything. And I always feel like whatever anybody brings up is relevant for everyone else. Someone always gets value out of it. So don't worry about being selfish, or it might not be the right topic. If you have something that is rising to the top, just bring it up. That's kind of my intention here. And then I'm going to do this 3 more times in January. The next one's going to be a week from today, and I'm going to talk about scarcity mindset, which is something that comes up in lots of my friends and colleagues. And the idea is focusing on how you're resourced. In medicine, we focus on how we have limited resource and are not resourced and what's missing. And so how to work on shifting your mindset to how you are resourced, and feeling resourced, given that tonight is about change, is really important as you set on a path to making change and transformation. And then I'm going to talk about prioritizing and pausing to prioritize, and prioritizing the pause. And those two are because I'm giving those talks somewhere else. And I thought I always like to experiment and give them here and see what works and what resonates. And it gets me thinking. So I'm going to do both of those, which will be fun. Some of it will be about the value of rest and also the value of alignment. And many of us don't even know what alignment looks or feels like, because we've been in medicine so long and it doesn't matter there. It should, but it's not emphasized. And so that's what we'll be talking about. So for tonight, I'm going to talk about what I call the prerequisites for effective transformation and change, and how to make it stick. And this topic has bubbled up to the surface and is inspired by the fact that I get so many questions of people who come to me thinking they might want to get coached, but they're really worried that it won't work for them. It works for other people, but they have some either particular problem or a particular way of thinking, and it won't work for them. Or they have tried and nothing has worked. Or maybe they've even done coaching and maybe they got some level of change and then it didn't stick, and they don't know why it didn't stick, and they're sort of back to their old habits. And then many people come thinking there's a right or a wrong way to do it, and that there's also a right time to do it. And is this the right time? And if they make a mistake along the way, something terrible will happen. And so people come with all of these questions. And so I wanted to dispel some of those thoughts and perhaps what I'll frame as unhelpful thought patterns, and give you some hope and some tips and things that I think actually will change that thinking, because I know and believe that it's possible for everyone to change. But you need to set yourself up for change, and you need to have a change mindset, and you need to have a, I always talk about body, mind, and spirit. So your body needs to be able to change. In other words, a healthy nervous system. And you need to not be depleted. You can't change on empty. And then you need very specific mindset patterns, knowing what your defaults are and knowing where they get in your way so that you can skip them. So I'm hoping that by the end, you will have a better insight as to why change is hard for you in particular. And you, by you, I mean generally high achievers or people in healthcare, and also most of the people who come to work with me are women, not all, but these things are harder for women. And then maybe why it hasn't worked for you in the past. And some people have changed, but they didn't end up where they wanted. They keep changing things outside of themselves. So what can you do to help yourself with that? And maybe something that you want to try. And then the last piece that I hope you'll leave with is an idea of how you can support yourself well. Because in medicine, we generally don't support ourselves. We think that getting support and help is weak and that we should do it all ourselves. And I absolutely thought that initially. And now I support myself super well. In fact, that is absolutely one of the most important prerequisites for change. So why change is hard for people like us is that when you are successful, it's actually harder to change, because when you change, you actually have to change. So you have to give up things that you are already good at and give up identities that you have as perhaps a physician. Or for me, you know, I had a panel that I had for many, many years. You have to give that up to do something different. And yet many of us would like to keep that too. We'd also like to keep maybe the health insurance and the other benefits. And the more you have, or the more success that you have, or even perceived success, it's harder to make a change. We are also experts at catastrophizing and focusing on the negative. So it's harder for us to change. We were trained to think that way in medicine, and we bring that mindset to change. And as a former site chief in pediatrics, that is one of the problems in most of our physician meetings, is that people catastrophize and think about worst case scenarios when we're thinking about changing the call schedule, or changing the way we do the vacations, or changing the way our patients get school forms. And so this negativity bias and catastrophizing keeps us from making changes. Also focusing on those negative what ifs, what negative thing could happen. And I know some of you are thinking about making change, and your brain is going to auto go to the negative. And so there are things you can do to set yourself up to notice those positives. We are trained to not like uncertainty in medicine. In fact, many of us picked medicine because you do X, you do Y, you do Z, and change involves, and transformation involves uncertainty. If you're going to become someone different, that is uncertain. And so we think uncertainty is dangerous or potentially negative, and yet it can very much be better. And in my case, change and transformation has led to a lot better than I anticipated. But that is not the way that our brain thinks when you embark on it. And most of us also don't want to make a mistake. We're trained to think mistakes are dangerous, and we don't want to disappoint people. And we are generally people pleasers. And so change is more challenging if that is your default mindset. We also have this mindset that I often talk about a lot, over responsibility. And so we take responsibility for our patients or our colleagues, for all of medicine itself and what happens to it. And so we tend to not focus on what's good for us, but we take responsibility for how our decisions will impact everybody and everything, even though we don't actually know how that will happen. And it might just turn out better than you think also. And then the last thing that really gets in the way of change is anxiety and discomfort. And when we are anxious or uncomfortable, we think something bad will happen. That's how we were trained to think in medicine. And so when you embark on change, you are 100% anxious and uncomfortable. And so then our brain is like, this is a bad idea. Let me go back to my old thinking. And so realizing that anxiety and discomfort just mean you're doing something unfamiliar. It doesn't mean it's dangerous. But your old patterning is going to tell you that. We also have a very strong scarcity mindset, which as I mentioned, I'll talk more about in the next session that I'm going to do. But we think there's a limited number of good outcomes. And so we have to pick the one, instead of thinking there might be 15 different ways of changing yourself that would make things better. And then we also, when I graduated, we're very much taught that we were lucky to have a job and we should feel grateful for the opportunity to do whatever we're doing. And that gets in the way of thinking, well, I might like to do something different, or I have personal desires. And so we're very much in this gratitude debt obligation, and we did this training, and so we're supposed to do this. And so that gets in the way of making change, even though for many people, change actually allows them to show up and contribute more fully and make more impact on the world. But it's hard for us to get there. So those are the things that I think that make it hard to change and to get in the way of change. And I actually did a session a while ago, a session like this, all on that. And so that is I will send out a link to that old session because I talked more about all of those things. Today, I really wanted to focus on these prerequisites for change, or what you need to have effective change and to make it stick. And as I mentioned in what I sent out, that is not willpower. That is not pushing harder or trying harder, which is what most of us were trained to do. So the first thing that I think you need is you have to actually really want to change. So many of us want things around us to change, or things to feel better, but we don't actually want to change. And it's hard to change if you don't actually want to change yourself and you don't have a desire. We also have to be willing to change ourselves. We have to know to some degree what we want. We have to trust ourselves and believe in ourselves, and trust the process and believe in the process of change. And then we have to practice a couple of things that many of us haven't practiced. So we have to practice energy management, and then this nervous system management I mentioned, and then kindness and self-compassion, or at least neutrality and acceptance. But we can't change from hating ourselves and being mean to ourselves and judging ourselves and feeling like we're doing things wrong. Nobody changes from that. Now, sometimes we change in the short term, but we always default back. So to have change integrate and to stay, you have to create this environment where change is welcome and you are safe to make change. And so that requires the nervous system. It requires the kindness. It requires energy. It requires support and having soft places to land and safe places in community and or a person to support you well. And then a willingness to practice and a willingness to let it take time. We are all very urgent. We want to make the change, have the change happen and feel better right away. We were trained to have an urgency bias. And so realizing that change is not necessarily a quick overnight thing, it takes time. So I thought I'd delve into each of those a little bit more. Truly wanting change and actually truly wanting change takes this slowing down, which many of us don't do, and connecting with what you really want. And many of us don't know how to do that and haven't ever done that. And so I often teach hand to heart. And I know for a few of you who are here who've perhaps been to Sagrada, like when you are there and you are slowing down at a retreat, you actually begin to see what you really want. But sometimes in the rapidity and just busyness of the day-to-day, we don't know. We were also taught not to listen and not to feel in medicine. And so we often haven't listened in a long time to what we want. And it wasn't important. If you have a bunch of children and a bunch of patients and a bunch of colleagues and all kinds of other things pulling at you, it's very hard to pause long enough to even know. So taking the time to figure out what you actually truly want and allowing that it's okay to want something is also part of it. So truly wanting it, allowing yourself to want it is the first piece. And then being willing to change, meaning the system doesn't have to change and other people don't have to change. And realizing that when we change ourselves, which is really all that's in our control, everything around us actually does change. But changing ourselves is really what's in our control. Even if you think about like the broken medical system, well, we'd like it to change and it will someday, but it's also not in our control for the most part. And when we are not in our most empowered state, just wishing for it to change, even the things that change don't really help us because we're in that victim mentality. And so deciding that you're not a victim and you're going to change yourself and you're going to focus on what's in your control is how you get to change that actually happens and actually sticks. And then intention. And so an intention in change, we often just want change. We have an idea of something out there that will be better. But being very specific about your intention. So it's setting intentions, and I call them intentions and not goals because those are outcome-based, but it's really just directing where you want to go, how you want to feel in life, what you want more of or less of. And without an intention or direction, you end up either random or generally our brain also defaults to the negative. And so we tend to go back to those negativity bias, the negative thoughts, why it won't work. So you want to give your brain somewhere to focus and somewhere to end up so that like if you have no GPS, who knows where you end up. And so when you set your mind to something, what you pay attention to is what you experience. And that intention helps you move towards something rather than just running away from something. There's also a lot of science around intentions, and intentions themselves release dopamine and acetylcholine, which provide motivation and focus and attention. And so just by setting them, you get some benefit. And then this belief and trust is the next one. And we were trained not to trust, actually. We were trained not to trust ourselves, trust and confirm other people. And so believing in yourself and trusting the process is very hard for many of us. And yet, if you are going to actually transform, you have to believe that you can. So many people who coach with me, I borrow my belief in them till they believe it themselves. At least one of you on this call is borrowing my belief right now. I always ask people to return it later because then I can give it to someone else. I mean, I have plenty of it, but there's no scarcity of it. But I do feel like people actually do come back to me and say, I don't need it anymore. I've made my change and I'm good. And so I believe that it's going to work now. But I think in the beginning, you often need to believe in borrow someone else's belief. And when I made my change, I borrowed my family's belief. They believed in me way more than me. And so you just borrow it from whoever believes in you. It's not that you don't, but you have this underlying self-doubt, which was always raised in medicine. Like, what might you not know? What might people discover? What terrible thing? And so we just get caught up in not trusting ourselves and worrying that mistakes are dangerous. And so I think that just growing that belief and trust, it takes tremendous practice. There is a podcast, the Mindful Healers podcast, which is the podcast that I host with Ni Cheng. There's a recent one on trusting yourself and trusting the process. So if you want to explore that more, there's like 45 minutes on that topic. And you also have to believe and trust the process. And it's just a choice to decide that you're going to do that. But it's a conscious choice that if you are doubting it the whole way, you're doubting every step that you've made and you don't have your back along the way. And then you tend to go backwards because you're like, well, what if I had done that? What if I had done this? Then you're not taking the steps that you need to get to the next step and to get to the next step. And there's a lot of work you can do in coaching about having your own back and what that means. And for me, that was the thing that helped me shift gears and move into the things I really wanted to be doing at this point in my life, was the ability to have my own back. And I didn't even know what that was before coaching. And I never had it, as it turns out. It was always like looking for external validation and looking for other signs that I had made the right choice. And then really not having my own back by regret and wondering if I had made that choice, what would happen? That is not an effective way to actually make change and have it stick. So then comes this practicing energy management, nervous system management, and what I call kindness and self-compassion. And those are the three things that I think even within coaching that many times we miss, and it slows down change and transformation and often undoes it. And the rationale here is that if you are an empty or totally depleted, nobody can change well from there. It's a little bit like your well-being is threatened. We don't make change and trust and step into new things and grow courage from a place of complete depletion. So many people in medicine are trying to change because they're burnt out. But I believe you have to actually do some of that work to replete yourself. So that's one of the primary intentions around the Sagrada Retreat. And I think why some of you who have been are like, wow, why does it work so well? That's why. It's very intentional to nourish and nurture yourself. And I would say in all the ways. Now, you can do this at home, but it has to be very intentional along the way. So finding things that replete your energy and making lists of them, because when you are not, when you're low in energy, that's not when you remember what makes you feel better and what gives you energy. And so connecting with what things deplete you and what things energize you can be really helpful. And also connecting to those things that in the short term feel good, like Facebook and chocolate. And those are the two that come to mind, shopping. They feel good in the short term, but they don't feel good in the long term. They are actually depleting your energy, not growing your energy. And so you want to be clear about what is actually increasing your energy. And then the nervous system management is why I bring mindfulness is one of the reasons why I bring mindfulness into coaching. Because you can't change when your nervous system is in sympathomimetic storm, or you're threatened, or you're in fight or flight. Nobody is willing to change the way they think and to mix things up. And nobody's particularly courageous. We're actually just reactive. We might feel courageous when we run away from the tiger, but we're really just reacting. And so that is a place where you might get quick change, but it doesn't stick. And so practicing you upregulating your parasympathetic nervous system with mindfulness, with yoga, with nature. There's so many things that do it. You have to figure out what works for you. It is one of the primary reasons why I teach yoga and offer coaching in my yoga, and that I blend these two things, because if you have a barely functioning parasympathetic nervous system, which most of us have, it's very hard to change. Your body's just going to be resistant and it won't stick. Whatever you do comes as a reaction. And you have to know what calm feels like. So this is one of those things that you really have to practice. And one of the things that I teach so often is what you practice grows. You have to practice evening out your nervous system. You have to practice calm. It is not natural. Most of us don't spend our lives there. And so it's something that you actually need to spend time doing so it can help you when you need it. And then similarly, practicing kindness and self-compassion. And most of us are generally mean to ourselves, and we have approached change or approached to getting through medical school and residency by being mean and working harder and saying not nice things. You might get in trouble, and what happens if you don't know this, and looking at what we do wrong and judging ourselves all the time and using that as a way to move forward. And while it does work in the short term, it's more of a willpower approach, and we run out of willpower. And so to me, you have to change, not from a place of being mean to yourself, but from a place of kindness, from a place of self-compassion, which for many of us is a journey to get to. So at least don't be mean to yourself, and then keep going from there. There are other paths, like neutral, I think, is an amazing way forward, and acceptance. And so in the midst of trying to transform yourself or your life, you're going to need different ones of these at different times. And so sort of learning what they look like and feel like and where you can find them and what questions you need to ask is a really useful tool. And from that place of kindness and self-compassion and neutrality, that's where you get creative, you get curious. That's where you can be more flexible and like navigate the choppy waters. Without that, you really don't navigate the choppy waters particularly well. So you need them. Shauna Shapiro talks about self-compassion as a life raft in stormy times. And that's how I like to think about it. And all change and all transition is stormy. And it takes a lot of courage, which is stormy. So the other things I had mentioned were supporting yourself well. And I know that I thought I could figure it out myself. I'd figured out all this other stuff myself. Why didn't I just figure that out too? And I think that supporting yourself well is one of the kindest things that you can do, to have either a group space that is supportive, or a person, somebody there who's with you on the journey. It's change and transforming is not an easy journey. We'd like it to be easy, but if it were easy, we would have all changed and all done it already. And so finding that space and the tools to support yourself, whether it's energy management, nervous system management, mindset management, it's all the things. And then the last thing is accepting that it takes time and it takes practice. So I mentioned that urgency bias. We just want to change. I often talk about baking rather than microwaving. When you microwave something, it doesn't taste as good. When you bake it and it all seeps together, that's where the change sticks. So you can change overnight and think, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that. But where you really get the benefit is when you take the time and you invest the time in changing, and you change maybe 1%, 5%. You don't just blow it all up overnight. Now, some of the changes are big changes that you kind of have to decide you're going to switch jobs or you're going to move, but you even get to that slowly. You're not running away from something, you're moving towards something, you have intention, you have all these resources, and you do it over time. Then the change will stick. And that might seem discouraging, but if you change 1%, 5% over time, you end up actually getting farther than this rapid race ahead and then coming backwards and race ahead and going backwards. So in my experience, investing the time in the change and letting it take the time that it needs is where you will end up somewhere very different than where you are today. And hopefully somewhere that you want to end up because you've set your intentions. So that's what I was going to share. So I'm going to look in the chat because I can see that there's comments there. And I am happy also to answer questions about what I said or questions about coaching or small groups, and then I'll delve into coaching. Does anyone have questions about things I said? I'm just looking in the chat here. I would say there's one question in here. I think it's Jillian who asked it. Like, what do you want versus what do you need? And I actually think that want is more powerful. If you have already set that intention to sort of take care of your basic needs, then you can delve into your wants. And so that's kind of the, when you are completely depleted, you can't change. And so if you haven't met your basic needs, which if you go back to like residency, for example, our basic needs were not met. So we're going into our default thought patterns and we're reacting. And so, or in any sort of emergency or traumas, it's very helpful there, but it's not helpful when you think about what do I want to do with my life, or what do I want to do with my relationship, or what do I want to do about my children, or whatever else it might be, my career. And so I think it's, to me, you have to take care of your needs first, and then you can get to your wants. But I think that we confuse the word needs and wants a lot. And so I actually teach in coaching that when you say, I need to do something, don't ever say that. Change it to, I want to, I get to, I choose to. And if you don't want to, get to, or choose to, don't do it. If you can't do that. Because even things like taxes, you want to pay your taxes because you don't want the IRS coming after you, for example. And so I think you can always change it. And if it's not one of those things, then you shouldn't do it. But I think it's that commitment to being kind to yourself. And that's where I would go for your needs. Like, it's not kind to not meet basic human needs. Does that make sense? Does it even answer your question? I don't know if that was your question.
It actually is. So I'm a fellow
Mhm.
in an unsafe situation. So safety, my need is not being met.
Yes.
And so I'm fried. And I'm realizing it in, like what you said, having your needs met first is important, because I'm so numb, I can't tell you what I want. And so
Right.
I'm trying to figure out my next steps, but I'm like, I
I think you can't do that. And I will often tell people this. So you would be, and I know that it's going to change, but you would be the exception to the rule. I often tell people you have to change your mindset before you make the change, because otherwise you get to the new thing with the same mindset, and then you don't actually have change because you're still looking at what's wrong and what's negative and all of those things. However, when you're in a toxic situation where your basic needs are not being met, or you are threatened or unsafe, your brain can't change. And so sometimes you have to step out of that before you can figure out what you actually want. Actually, I would say you always do, because your brain is literally dealing with that threat. And that's not a brain that can flexibly think about, oh, what do I really want? What's really important to me? You may have pockets of that, like maybe on a weekend off, you can tap into it slightly. But I think it's not going to be, that's where I say, like, you also have to bring your body into change. And so if your body is threatened, you can't change in that spot, which doesn't mean you can't take really good care of yourself and be kind to yourself. You can do a lot of the prerequisites, but you're not gonna, it's actually something we were sort of taught in medicine, which is like, put yourself in very uncomfortable situations all the time where dangerous things might happen, and just disregard how you feel. And so for you, it's really beefing up that nourishment. What can you do to take care of yourself? What can you do to be kind to yourself and give yourself some level of energy, so that when you can step out of it, and I think you're stepping out of it as soon as possible, then you'll be able to have that thought about what you really want.
I find during your yoga sessions, I'm clear. So
Yes,
I just wanted to say that I've been increasing my yoga with Jessie time, because it's been very helpful. So thank you.
Yes. And I think that's true. Go to the pockets of space where you have clarity. For me, like, there's certain places in the world. I live near the beach. Like my spot on the beach is, I have clarity there. Or certain, I have clarity at Sagrada. It has like a certain physical energy. And I think that we all have that. And when I'm practicing yoga, same thing. I have a lot of clarity. So that's one of the reasons I do it. So, and that's actually because your nervous system is safe there. It's in a cocoon. Anyone else have questions that you are wanting to ask? Yeah, go ahead and unmute, Rebecca, and just ask away.
I'm Rebecca. First time meeting Jessie. I sent you an email. I wanted to follow up on Jillian's comment, because I have a similar problem of not being able to articulate what I want, but more in the sense I have the general sense. I know like
Mhm.
the type of role that I want to have, but then being able to take that next step to articulate that very specifically, because I could many different roles. This is currently about my career transitions. I could see many different roles providing that, but people that in order to get that sort of the general part, the theme, I feel like I can articulate more concretely.
Well,
And
so what I think is really helpful there is to think about how you want to feel, which I bet you know. That's what I think you're saying is, how you want to feel in life. And even if you haven't thought about it that way, that's one of the things that I think is most valuable. Figure out how you want to feel. Then you can start to work backwards as to what you need to do. You can also start feeling that way, and you will get better sense of what directions you want to go in. Remember also, you brought in that scarcity mindset right there, that like, well, which is the one? Like, what if there are 10 things you could do that would also bring you more joy, or not even joy, but just work better for you than what you're doing now? Because that takes the pressure off. Then all of a sudden it's like, well, I like this part and I like this part. And the other piece is, we often in medicine look for the job that is the closest fit to what we think we want. But I might actually really think about, what things you love about your current job. How do you want to feel? Where are you in the most flow? Like, look at it that way, kind of look at it backwards. And then you can match it up, because we get caught up in this. Is this the right choice? Is this the right choice? And we are so disconnected from how we feel and what our needs are, because most of us have put those aside because we had to in order to keep doing exactly what you were doing.
I find that when I'm trying to communicate with others about what I want in my next role, that not having that concreteness, maybe I just step out of their box. But people want to put you in a box. You want to do medical affairs, or you want to do drug development, or you want to do XYZ. And I could be in any of those roles if I could achieve these goals in terms of how I want to contribute and how I want to feel.
Right, which is beautiful, because then you could be in any. And we do try to put people in boxes. That's very traditional career coaching. And you may or may not end up where you want to go. That's where I think this GPS intention of how you want to feel, and what feels good to you as a human, and work backwards from that. Because I bet you're right that it's probably more important the place that you land than the actual role that you have. And oftentimes we do the interview and we just know, like, this place feels right and I have no idea why. That is the place you should go. Like, our brain wants to calculate, make decisions based on certain criteria. And they're generally not the best criteria. And that's where I think doing the work of really working on your brain and seeing where you're getting caught up, and where, like, you just demonstrated in a perfect way, like, you have the scarcity mindset. What if I make the wrong choice? Or all these other people are putting you into a box. And when we're in the box, it's very hard to figure out what we want to do. So going out this way and having that creativity and curiosity, which comes when you feel safe, Jillian, right? And the clarity. And when you can get your nervous system into a healthier spot, which doesn't come when you're feeling scarce, or you're feeling judged, or you're trying to figure out what's wrong with you and articulating it. My thought is, I'm actually not very good at articulating it, but I am very good at feeling it. And you actually have to figure out what kind of person you are. And I used to feel bad that, oh, well, how would I not explain this? And it's like, and if that's actually much more powerful than, a single way of explaining it. Because the reason you don't know what you want is you've never done any of those things. How would you possibly know what it's like to be in medical affairs, or, I don't know, pharma, or whatever else you're looking at? Most people don't. And then the other question is, a lot of people are going there just to get away from what they're doing, but they're not actually moving towards something. And so you do really want to be moving towards something. And whether that's just a feeling or a way of moving through the world, because when you find that, lots of ideas open up and opportunities open up that you didn't think of.
Yeah. I'm actually in between an industry job, so at least I have that background, but there's so many industry jobs out there that I've never done.
Yeah. Well, and looking back at what you like, where you are and where you were, like the things that you liked in all those places.
Lots to think about. Thank you. I don't,
Yeah,
I
yeah,
see
yeah.
somebody else has their hand
Sure.
up.
Yeah, Joni, go ahead. Oh, I'm still muted though. Try that.
No, my internet has been acting crazy, so it keeps freezing. But I'm Joni. I love your talks, Jesse, and I do your yoga too. My New Year's intention was to do more yoga, and I've done it twice this week, and I feel like a new person. If I can sustain this, it would be amazing. But
yeah, well, keep going. If it feels good, you might. Like if you do it because it feels good, that's where I tap into, because that helps me keep going.
yeah, well, I just
I'm
turned
supposed to, it doesn't work as well.
absolutely, and I just turned 40, so lots of things hurt, and amazingly, they don't hurt after your session.
Yes.
So
I'm so glad.
Well, I really liked what you said in the beginning about a lot of us being people pleasers. And I've been fortunate and unfortunate to not have worked for the past 2 years. And this random group in my area, I moved from California to Georgia, recruited me. And it seems like kind of an amazing job that I didn't even want, which was very weird. I have found myself like going back into my old habits of people pleasing. And then I'll go to my husband and be like, gosh, they really need me to work like these 2 days. And they're not happy with me working in this place. And he's like, you don't want this job. Like, I don't even understand. And I like kind of agreed to it, but I didn't in writing. But he's like, I don't understand. Like, you don't want, like, you don't need a job. You weren't looking for a job. Like, why are you kind of, he's like very good at not violating his like priorities. And he's like super clear on those things. And I've always been very envious of him, but it's like those neural pathways of like, I'm a team player and like, look at me, like who wouldn't want to work with me? I'm like willing to bend over backwards, but I'm not. So I was like, wondering like how do I tackle that? Like I now know it's a problem. I don't think I knew it was a problem before. I always thought this is like how I became chief and succeeded and got all these roles, but it's like super pathological if you think about it. Because I'm like, why am I literally taking time and like because I've decided family is my number 1, 2, and 3 goal for my life, and I don't need to be a sacrificial lamb anymore. And it doesn't matter that I went to school for 15 years. I don't have to work for till I'm 65. Like this is my life and I get to choose it. So yeah, I'm like so confused.
I think it's noticing it's a habit. So the first piece of change is noticing. And then the other piece that I'm hearing in what you're saying is there's a bit of judgment, like I shouldn't be like this. But I would go to my favorite, and I think you listen to the podcast, Loving Amusement, that like, of course, someone offered you something and you were like, oh my God, that sounds great. Let me do that because it feels so good, right? And so of course you decided that it would be a good idea in the short term. Thankfully, you didn't agree to anything in writing. But I would just like hand to heart, like, of course that happened. It's not a problem because you will, once you notice it and you are not judging yourself about it, you're not a bad person for doing that. It's just an old habit that surfaced. And I'm like, of course it surfaced. The other thing is you, even more so than people pleasing, is that you don't want to disappoint them, right? Yeah. And but you were going to disappoint yourself. You just told me.
Yes.
So then I'm like, if you're going to disappoint someone, decide, are you going to disappoint them or you? Or your family, which you told me was 1, 2, and 3.
Yes. Yeah. And it's like, I've always thought it was like my training program or my med school or where I worked, but it's me. Like I'm the one who's kind of,
it's a little bit both. It's a little bit both. So what I would say is, everybody here's training program. instilled that into them in times of trauma, so it sticks. Okay. And in med school, same thing. But then you go back to like college, you also had to be a people pleaser, and you also had to do what people said in order to get the grades, in order to get into med school. And then you go back farther in your life, and to get into that college, you had to do it. And many of us are that type of person. That's why we chose this type of career. And so part of it is you, but part of it was then sort of seared into you in times of trauma. And so the way out is really to notice it with compassion. So it's not that you're broken. You just have these tendencies, and the world greatly benefits from those tendencies, and they reward you for them. So you did them, but you're absolutely right. You don't have to. I think the path for you though is kindness. Like, being mean to yourself about it, you will not change, and you will not stay changed. And so, and then the other thing I would probably notice is that I bet there's a nervous system activation there too. When you're thinking about disappointing someone, you just get very anxious. That would be your sympathetic nervous system freaking out. And it's hard to change there. And so that's where doing more yoga is going to help you begin to balance those two things out over time. And that takes time. We're like, yeah, I've done 2 yogas and I should be able to like activate my parasympathetic nervous system like that. No, I mean, I can do it now after like 6 years of doing it all the time, which again, 1% gets you closer and closer. We were trained though, Jillian mentions like being the sacrificial to be a team player. Like, we were told that if we didn't do that, we would starve and die and be kicked off the island. Right. And so your brain thinks that. And so even though you didn't search this out, notice that how tender a spot that is. They sought you out, and then you now feel guilty for letting them down.
Yeah. And it's like, yeah, because I think the juxtaposition between how my husband sees it and like how I see it, like when at my previous job, I was like told I was so lucky to get this position, and that like even the recruiter told me that
I were lucky to have you. I don't know where this story came from.
I
right?
know, and it was
You
just
trained
like,
for 15 years to do this. Why are you lucky?
I don't even understand it. And so then I signed up for like journal club and all this stuff after work when I was already exhausted. And my husband was like, do you want to have a drink with your girlfriends, or do you want to read a really boring journal? And I was like, when you put it that way, it's like so easy, but that's like how his brain works. So I'm like, I have so much to learn.
Medicine?
No.
Okay. So that's case in point. That's part of it. And he's also not female. And so just, I mean, we have more threats to comply and people please. Like, we were raised to do that. Most of us, it's unusual to not have that tendency as a female. And so
well, that makes me
my
feel
thought
better.
is learn from him. I have a middle son who like believes in himself and has from the day he came out. And like, I don't know where he got it from, but I just watch him and learn. I'm just like, wow, people can think like that. I'm going to borrow this. Right. So just watch your husband, or you can even ask him and like have him be your check. This is where let other people support you. My husband does that for me. Like, if I'm overdoing it, he's like, you might want to, he has a nice way of saying it. Now I'm like, oh, okay.
Yeah, my husband says that it's putz time. He's also an attorney, so I feel like
maybe that's it. Yeah. I don't know where they learned it, but I do think because they should be people pleasers too. But this is where there's a woman component of it, because women attorneys, and I've worked with a few of them, think more like women doctors. So there is the female edge to it, and that's cultural. But I think if you notice it, that's your first job. And if that's your only thing you do, that's 80% of the win, right? So just notice. And I think even, I love this sort of hand to heart practice and just noticing like, wow. You might even think at the end of each day, like, where did I show up people pleasing or worried about disappointing people? Because I worry a little bit based on what you said, that you might also do that as a mom, because these things carry over and use, right? So then we don't want to disappoint our kids, and we don't want to, be the person on the PTA who does nothing or whatever, right? Like it becomes that. And so we carry it over. So you might want to be watching for it each day if it's a long-term tendency, and realize that 1% less of it every day for 365 days is a lot.
Yeah, no,
And
that's
if
really
it's,
good
yeah,
advice.
if you're baking it, there's no microwaving people pleasing, right? It just
Yeah.
blows. It's the kind of thing that give it time. And then the other thing about giving it time is investing time and working on it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I do now like mandate like an hour every day that's like something to nourish my like
Mhm.
parasympathetic system. So your yoga has gotten into that category.
Yeah.
Before I was
excellent.
like doing
Yeah.
too much. I was like walking and doing this and
Yeah.
meditating. I tend to be like a
I was
high
going to say a
overachiever.
checklist wellness person. Don't be a
Yeah.
checklist wellness person.
That's how you
Um,
burn out and don't do
yes,
anything.
yes, yeah. So, but
Yeah.
that's why I think that the yoga will work, because what you said is you like it. And
I
so
do,
rather
yeah.
than saying, I'm going to spend an hour on my nervous system, I'm going to spend an hour doing something that I like to do, that feels good. Or
Mhm.
I would call it, because you're worried about people pleasing, please yourself. An
Mhm.
hour pleasing Joni first, so that even if you please other people, you've also pleased yourself.
Yes.
And that's another thing that I think works really well, is like, sometimes we can't put ourselves first, but we can include ourselves. So I call that me as well, rather
Mhm.
than the,
Oh, I like
put
that.
on your own oxygen mask, but just at
Mhm.
least put yours on too. Because a lot of people are like, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to put it on before my kids, or I'm not going to do that. As a lot of ER docs have trouble with that for some reason. I'm like, well, can you just put yours on it as well if the whole place is, whole plane's going down? They're totally willing to do that. And so if you think about it that way, it's a kinder way to approach it, because the other is, again, that pushing yourself too far, too fast, and then it doesn't stick. I think a lot of people in change want to change so much, and they just want to change it now, and it doesn't work. It's like you have to go step by step by step by step.
Mm-hmm. No, I love that. I'll do it at the same time. I can agree with that.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. An hour for you, an hour for the kids, an hour for you.
Yeah.
Because notice it's like the ratio is off, I'm certain, even if you're doing some yoga.
Oh, 100%. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Before I had none though. So this is definitely a step
Yeah.
forward.
Yes. Well, and
Yeah.
notice how far you've come. I always feel
Mm-hmm.
like that's a biggie.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you,
You're
Jessie. I love
welcome.
what you were doing for this
Sure.
space and for all of us. I really
Oh,
appreciate it.
Thank you. I appreciate you for coming. Anyone else have questions, comments, thoughts, want help with anything? I'm going to read what you wrote, Jillian, or you can just say it.
As she was talking, I spent a lot of time ruminating about all the times I'm people pleasing, because it creates so much stress in myself. And a lot of times I'll create work because I'm trying to gain someone's approval, even if I know that nothing I can do will gain that person's approval, but it's to avoid the discomfort of disapproval. And it's leading
Yeah.
to increased exhaustion that I'm experiencing at this moment.
Can you just accept, this has worked really well for me. There's some people that will never be happy. You're not going to get their approval no matter what. And just let it lie.
I tried, yeah, I'm trying to, my word of the year is allow. I'm trying to
What are you afraid of if you just let them, like, they're unhappy people?
Yeah, I think it's what is it like childhood trauma type of experience where I've constantly tried to gain my dad's approval and never could. And I find I get myself in work environments that are not healthy for me with the same type of male figure. I try to, like, that's my psychoanalysis that I'm trying to break.
So the way that I sometimes, and I don't know if this will work, and we always want to, you want to be thoughtful about the trauma piece, but if you keep these same thoughts that your dad gave you, which is you should try harder to make me happy,
Yeah.
you will continue to do that. But you're just borrowing his thoughts about the world, that Jillian should always try to make people happy, and that it's possible to make him happy if you did the right thing.
And it never worked. I'm 30.
It never works. Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
But you don't have to borrow his thoughts anymore. You
Yeah.
can give them back to him.
Give them back. I'm reading Untamed by Glennon Doyle. I put in the chat. It's very helpful. But yeah, I think keep hearing it. Like you said, you need to keep practicing it. I'll probably come to a few of your coaching things with the same thing.
Yes, that's all right. It takes time.
Yeah, rewiring, then brain.
But I think too around change and transforming, very often we carry other people's beliefs. My parents are not great, well, at this point in their life, and probably the whole time I've been alive, they haven't been people who are transforming or changing or risk taking. And so I sort of carry that. And when I realized that that was their thought, like that, you know, you should, they really wanted, my parents are actually had a very, you know, unstable career. So they really liked it that I had a stable career. But that's their whole journey. It's not my journey. I can do whatever I want. And when I realized that I was carrying their fears, not my fears, I was like, well, I can just give that back.
Mhm.
And it came up in kind of a funny way. My parents are in their 80s, and they've had a crazy journey with COVID. And my dad spent his 80th birthday on his porch. This was not in the heat of COVID. People were having family gatherings, but he was not, and he's still not. And he's almost 82 now. But at any rate, that was what he wanted to do. And meanwhile, he has all these grandchildren, and he has a great grandchild, like he had never met. And like none of us were allowed on the porch, we're allowed on the sidewalk. And it became very clear to me, I was like, I am not going to be the person who's on the porch when I'm 80. And if I worry about all the things, like if I approach life that way, this is his way of approaching it. And he gets to do that if he's 80. I'm not going to change him. I thought actually for a while that I should change him because he just wasn't getting it and he was making a mistake. But husbands are very wise. My husband was like, your parents are very happy on the porch. They're very happy at home. They don't actually want to be out doing stuff. Works for them in their 80s. And I was like, he's absolutely right. They're very happy. And so now not only have I have gotten rid of their worries about things, I'm not even worrying about them. They're happy. And it's very liberating, and it's much easier to be who you want to be. So I think sometimes, and I say this with total love, but sometimes people have had a lot of trauma, feel like they have to undo it all and unwire it all. And coaching does offer this chance of like, yeah, it came from here. This is where it came from. And what do I want to do now? And when it's triggers, it's like, oh, it's just an old trigger. I think that now. It's just a trigger from my childhood. I don't have to pay attention to it.
I love that you've given me two imageries. You before taught me to be a tree, which I do a lot, and now just this image of giving back, right?
Yes.
Giving it back. So thank you. That was very helpful.
Give it back to your dad. Even if he's not alive, he can still take it back. I don't know if he's alive or not, but I've had many people just give it right back. Like them, you know, I don't need that anymore. Thank you.
Yeah, I also agree with the book recommendation, The Build the Life You Want. That's a good one.
Beautiful. Beautiful. I think that is a great place to, oops, someone else is joining us. I hope that maybe they have the wrong time, but either way, I think it's a great place to finish up unless people have more questions. I'm going to do another session a week from now. As I mentioned, on scarcity and connecting with your resources, because it's a really fun way to rethink things. And if anyone wants to join, I have two groups coming up. One is the Transition Well group, which is really fun. Well, they're both really fun. And Ongoing Presence is for getting coached. You have to be a woman physician for that one, but you can get coached on anything. So parenting, relationships, work, that one. And they both go for 5 months. We meet twice a month, and then some people do one-on-ones along the way. So if you're interested in those, and transition, people are transitioning in whatever way they might want to. You know, sometimes people are brand new in their doctor career. Sometimes people are retiring. Sometimes they're changing jobs. They're doing a fellowship. They're getting divorced. Their children are going to college. It doesn't really matter what the change is. It's sort of, but everyone in there is navigating something or wanting to be navigating something. How's that? Because sometimes they haven't actually taken the leap yet. But I do always tell people, it doesn't really matter which group you're in. I built the Transition Well group out of the other group because it felt that energy of people making changes, a very different energy than people who are not really focused on making big changes in their life, and other people are really still making things work. So a lot of people move from Ongoing Presence to Transition Well when they quit their job or move across the country or something like that. But if one night works better for you than the other, it doesn't matter, because I do all the coaching, and they're both small groups, and they're both amazing groups of women doctors. So If either of those interest you, you can join in January or in July, and otherwise I keep the group the same and closed so that it's kind of a safe community. So this is the time of year to do it. But I am around. And for those of you who are thinking about coming to yoga, there's no live yoga on this Saturday, but I'll be back next Saturday. So, but there are lots of recordings on YouTube. You can do any time that works for you. So I will see maybe some of you next week and some of you on your yoga mat next week. So reach out if you have questions, and nice to see you all.